Hello and welcome to Cannabis History, where we explore the forgotten stories, hidden figures, ancient uses, political battles, and cultural moments that shaped the world's relationship with cannabis. They say the best way to fight drug cartels is with guns, raids, or even the military. But here's the truth: the most powerful weapon we've ever had against cartels isn't a drone strike, it's a receipt from a dispensary. Every legal dollar spent on cannabis is a dollar cartels don't get. Cannabis legalization is one of the most debated topics in America today. Opponents warn of crime and chaos, while supporters argue it's the only way to end decades of failed policies. And when you look at the history, the economics, and the data, the picture is clear. Prohibition didn't stop cannabis, it supercharged organized crime. Legalization has done more to undercut cartels and strengthen communities than decades of the war on drugs ever did. In this video, we'll trace that story. How Prohibition turned cannabis into a cartel cash cow, how medical and recreational markets broke their grip, why legal stores always beat illicit ones, and what really happened to crime and community funding after legalization. By the end, you'll see why every legal dollar spent on cannabis is a dollar cartels don't get, and why that might be the most effective crime-fighting strategy we've ever had. Chapter 1. How Prohibition created the cartel cash cow. To understand why every legal dollar matters today, we need to rewind a bit. Cannabis didn't start as a cartel business. It became one because Prohibition was created, and the federal government handed it to them. It all began in the 1930s, when Harry Anslinger and the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, under the Roosevelt administration, launched the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. Contrary to popular belief, it did not outlaw cannabis, but instead imposed an occupational excise tax and a transfer tax on its dealings. It effectively made it illegal for most Americans to possess or sell cannabis due to the complex registration and stamp requirements for the taxes. Then, in 1970, Nixon doubled down like a dingus with the Controlled Substances Act, slapping cannabis into Schedule I and effectively making the cultivation, possession, and sale of cannabis for any purpose, including research, illegal under federal law. Overnight, millions of Americans became potential criminals, and that's where the modern war on cannabis begins. And here is where the irony starts. Prohibition didn't stop cannabis production or people from purchasing the plant. It just inflated the value on the black market. Just like alcohol prohibition in the 1920s that profited bootleggers and greatly expanded the power of the mafia, cannabis prohibition in the 70s and 80s created smugglers and cartels. As Winston Churchill once said, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And to absolutely no one's surprise who understands the facts, that's exactly what happened. Where alcohol prohibition gave us Al Capone, Charlie Luciano, and Meyer Lansky, cannabis prohibition gave us the Black Tuna Gang, Dan McGuinness, and eventually the Guadalajara Cartel. Almost overnight, the price of cannabis shot up. In the early 1970s, you could pick up an ounce of Mexican brick weed for just $20 to $40. But by 1976, prices had skyrocketed so dramatically that even the New York Times was reporting on it. In an article titled "Price of Marijuana Soars as Its Use Increases Among the Nation's Affluent," the paper noted that in New York City, an ounce could fetch as much as $150. And the price didn't level off or drop from there, it went up again. According to a 2001 report from the Office of National Drug Control Policy, by the fourth quarter of 1986, the average price of an ounce had risen to between $286 and $400. That's an increase of more than 600% from the early 1970s. Once the cartels saw the profitability and that demand could not be suppressed, it caused other groups to join the market, and the illegal cannabis trade continued expanding. Mexican cartels, like the Guadalajara Cartel, consolidated power. trafficking marijuana alongside cocaine and heroin. Under Reagan's escalation of the war on drugs, enforcement intensified, but instead of cutting supply, it drove prices up again. By the 1990s, an ounce of higher-grade cannabis could fetch $300 to $500. And by then, the next generation of cartels had stepped in. After Rafael Caro Quintero's imprisonment, his brothers carried on the family business, while new players like the Gulf Cartel, Los Zetas, and especially the Sinaloa Cartel under Joaquin El Chapo Guzman turned marijuana into a pillar of their empires. Cocaine and heroin brought them prestige, but cannabis was the reliable cash flow that kept operations humming. To get a better idea about how this all played out, I highly recommend watching the full Narcos series on Netflix. It might be dramatized, but it will give you an idea about how crazy that time was. The tide formally began to turn in the mid-1990s when California passed Prohibition 215, becoming the first state to legalize medical cannabis, followed by Oregon, Washington, Maine, Colorado, and more, which started chipping away at the black market's monopoly. At the same time, U.S. growers were improving indoor cultivation techniques and producing stronger, higher-quality cannabis that could compete with smuggled weed. By the early 2000s, cannabis was still a major share of cartel revenue, but cracks were showing. Domestic medical markets were slowly scaling. Consumer tastes were shifting away from compressed imports, and Prohibition's grip was beginning to loosen. Chapter 2. Follow the money. By 2010, there were hundreds of thousands of medical marijuana users nationwide. Today, that number has grown to over 3.6 million registered patients, with Florida alone nearing 900,000 participants. Each one of those people represents a repeat customer who used to depend on the illicit market, who are now buying legally and paying taxes on their purchases. In fact, many of the states that created a medical marijuana program were so happy with their decision that recreational cannabis has followed. For example, Colorado and Washington led the way in 2012, and more states pass legislation every election cycle. By 2024, legal cannabis sales reached over $30 billion annually. California's market alone topped $4.6 billion, with Michigan, Illinois, Massachusetts, Missouri, and others adding billions more. That's not just money changing hands, that's millions of ounces moving through regulated systems, taxed and tracked, instead of going through cartel smuggling routes. Now compare that rise with what U.S. Customs and Border Protection has been tracking. In 2012, the very year Colorado and Washington voted to legalize, CBP seized about 2.5 million pounds of marijuana at the southwest border. By 2017, that number had already plunged to around 1.3 million pounds. By 2022, seizures fell to just 155,000 pounds nationwide, and by 2023, barely 61,000 pounds. That's a 95 to 98% decline from the peak years of Prohibition. So why the drop? It isn't that CBP suddenly got less effective or stopped policing. It's that the business model collapsed. When American consumers can buy stronger, fresher cannabis down the street, often for under $200 an ounce in competitive markets, why would cartels risk smuggling across the border? The economics just don't add up anymore. This is what economists call price compression. As domestic legal cultivation expanded, wholesale prices fell dramatically. In the 1990s and early 2000s, cannabis could fetch $300 to $500 an ounce on the street. Today, in states with mature markets like Oregon or Colorado, wholesale prices per pound have dropped so low that ounces can retail for under $100. For cartels, that means the risk getting caught by border patrol, seizures of product, and prison time far outweighs the shrinking reward. Lay those curves side by side and the story becomes undeniable. As patient counts and legal sales climbed, cartel imports collapsed. It's not coincidence, it's cause and effect. Legalization turned cannabis into a domestic commodity, erased the risk premium that once enriched smugglers, and priced cartels out of the market. What 4 decades of the war on drugs couldn't accomplish, legalization did in one. It didn't just lower arrests, it removed the profit incentive for cartels to even bother smuggling weed into the U.S. According to the Tax and Budget Bulletin number 83 from the Cato Institute in 2018, all told, drug legalization could generate up to $106.7 billion in annual budgetary gains for federal, state, and local governments. When you include inflation, that number today is more than $137.6 billion. To put that in perspective, an August article in Politico reported that the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, had saved just $1.2 billion so far. By comparison, as of July, Americans had already paid $122 billion under Donald Trump's tariff program. Imagine if that money had stayed in our pockets and we weren't talking about how companies are raising prices or cutting essential government programs like nuclear safety or disease research. Chapter 3. Why Markets Beat Manhunts. Let's step back and talk about why legalization dismantled the cartel cannabis business in a way raids and military operations never could. At the end of the day, markets beat manhunts. Legal stores win on 3 fronts. First, quality and predictability. With regulated cannabis, every jar comes with lab results, clear labeling, and consistent potency. As a consumer myself, I can tell you, the difference is night and day. The first time you purchase medical cannabis, a few things will stand out immediately. The product is less harsh and is of higher quality when compared to anything you have experienced before. The buds are fresher, handled better, and cured properly, meaning no mold, no mystery seeds, no stems masquerading as weight. And beyond that, you can actually rely on the strain name and its effects. If you buy Blue Dream, it is guaranteed to be Blue Dream every single time. That kind of predictability just doesn't exist in the illicit market. Second, convenience and access. Before I had medical cannabis, picking up meant blocking off 2 to 4 hours just to meet a supplier. And that was if they even showed up. It was a waiting game full of cancellations, delays, and the awkwardness of climbing into some random person's car. Now, I can walk into a dispensary, check out a menu, and be back home in under 30 minutes. No stress, no wasted time, and no uncertainty about whether I'd actually make it back with what I came for. That peace of mind is worth as much as the product itself. Third, price over time. In the illicit era, Prohibition kept prices artificially high, but as domestic cultivation expanded under legalization, wholesale prices collapsed. Today in mature markets like Colorado and Oregon, you can find ounces for under $100, something cartels can't compete with. And that's the power of price compression. Legalization removed the risk premium smugglers once relied on. Now let's address a common myth, that getting a medical cannabis card is some kind of impossible barrier. The truth? It's not. While the process varies from state to state, most programs are surprisingly accessible. Cannabis helps with a wide range of conditions: chronic pain, anxiety, insomnia, nausea, meaning most people who genuinely need it qualify. Once you have a card, you gain a degree of legal protection that recreational buyers don't always have. And here's a bonus that people often forget. Medical cannabis is usually cheaper. Most states limit the amount of tax that can be collected on medical sales, so patients often pay significantly less at the register compared to recreational customers. So when you put it all together, quality, predictability, convenience, safety, lower prices, and real legal protection, it's easy to see why consumers choose legal over illegal. And every time they do, that's another dollar cartels don't get. That's the quiet revolution happening right now, and it's why legalization is succeeding where prohibition failed. Chapter 4. Does legalization lower crime? If cartel cannabis shrank because of legalization, we should see two things on the ground. First, that crime doesn't surge, and in some cases, it even goes down. And second, that the dollars from legal sales flow back into communities through prevention, safety, and support programs. On the crime side, the evidence is strong. Studies show that when border states implemented medical cannabis programs, violent crime rates in cartel-exposed areas dropped significantly. A 2017 study in the Economic Journal by Evelina Gavrilova, Takuma Kamada, and Floris Zootman analyzed FBI county-level data from 1994 to 2012, found that when a border state implemented a medical marijuana law, violent crime rates dropped by approximately 13% on average. The effect was strongest close to the border. California saw about a 15% reduction, while Arizona saw around 7%. Most heavily impacted were robberies at 19% and homicides 10%, with drug trade-related homicides plummeting by a staggering 41%. Meanwhile, in Oregon, researchers published a 2021 study in the International Journal of Drug Policy, analyzing FBI crime clearance rates from 2007 to 2017. They found that violent crime clearance rates actually improved after legalization, especially for aggravated assault. The interpretation is straightforward. Once police weren't chasing low-level cannabis crimes, they had more capacity to solve serious cases. And in Washington, the state's own independent review backs this up. The Washington State Institute for Public Policy evaluated Initiative 502 and found that cannabis possession convictions plummeted after legalization, while there was, quote, little evidence of increases in non-cannabis criminal charges. In other words, fewer people were being saddled with criminal records, and the broader crime picture stayed stable. In response to these findings, I have to ask, who would have thought that when our local, state, and federal governments implement common-sense regulations, it makes it better for everyone? The second part of this story is where legalization really flips prohibition on its head: the money. In the pre-legalization era, the fact is that every dollar spent on cannabis strengthened a cartel. Today, those same dollars are earmarked for programs that build safer communities. Illinois, for example, directs 25% of its adult use tax revenue into the Restore, Reinvest, Renew program, which funds violence prevention, youth development, re-entry services, and legal aid in communities most harmed by the drug war. California also reinvests cannabis revenue into local safety and health programs. Under Proposition 64, the Board of State and Community Corrections oversees grants that have provided tens of millions of dollars to support law enforcement, fire protection, and youth prevention programs. As of June 3, 2025, the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration reports that since January 2018, the state has collected more than $7 billion in cannabis tax revenue, including $3.7 billion from the cannabis excise tax and over $2.8 billion from sales tax. Similarly, Colorado routes much of its marijuana tax revenue into the Marijuana Tax Cash Fund, which by law must support healthcare, substance use prevention and treatment, law enforcement, and public school programs. New Jersey has taken a similar approach, with a large share of its cannabis revenue earmarked for social equity and reinvestment. The state created the Social Equity Excise Fee, ensuring that money from each sale is redirected into programs in communities disproportionately affected by prohibition. And in Massachusetts, where I've personally worked in the industry, host community agreements allowed cities and towns to negotiate additional benefits. I have seen communities ask for up to 10% of gross sales to come back as community impact fees. In practice, that means working directly with local leaders. On numerous occasions, I sat across the table from local officials and residents to discuss how our company could help support the local community. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of today's episode. Like so much of cannabis history, this story forces us to ask a bigger question. How many other plant medicines were known, used, forgotten, rediscovered, and then renamed as something new. That is what makes cannabis history so fascinating. Every time we follow the plant, we find another hidden doorway into medicine, culture, politics, and human curiosity. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you're notified when we release more content like this. Also be sure to check out our YouTube channel, Cannabis History, where we explore the ancient roots and modern impact of one of the world's most misunderstood plants, cannabis.